2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Tuesdays are our politics day, and only a couple of weeks now from the New South Wales state election. Our Professor of Politics, Jim Jones, is going to take a look at that for us. Jim, if you are the government, are you happy going to this election, or are you a bit concerned?
Well, at the moment, I think if you're the New South Wales government, then yes, you would be thinking that you're in a pretty good position. If we take it that economic indicators, Mark, are positive, are the sorts of things that will influence voters, on the surface, the New South Wales government is presiding over a pretty good economy statewide. The official unemployment figures are pretty good, among the lowest in the country, around about 3.9, 3.8%. That's pretty good. Yes, the construction industry is sort of faltering a little with the downturn in the property market, but even that is a decline on a peak rather than a decline from, a level setting. So it's not like things are heading into disaster and that people can turn around and blame the government. For the most part, if you're the government at the moment, you'd be thinking, well, we're in a pretty good position to go to the polls with what appears to be a pretty good record.
So if you're the opposition, you've got to try and spin something to get all of the Liberal National supporters to say, hey, come and have a look at us because we are the alternative. If there's not a lot of bad stuff up there, how do you spin that?
Well, I think for the Labor Party, they're doing as good a job as they can. They're capitalising, of course, on the state of the federal coalition so that they're trying to ensure that the state level gets some sort of fallout from that. And for the most part, I think that the state government is manoeuvring around that reasonably successfully. So there's not a lot of room for the Labor Party. Where it does look like it's getting a little bit more traction is around the issue of climate change policy and the sorts of policies that need to be thought about and brought into play over the next decade or so.
Well, they're able to take a sort of, co-opt some of the green stuff to sort of take to the left and as you said before we started, kind of seem a little bit in the centre. So that's a win for them. You mentioned fallout or that kind of separation between national and state Liberal governments. Do you think maybe, Jim, this is why we're not seeing a lot of policy platform from Scott Morrison and co, because they want to give the state election a chance and then maybe see how the results go here and then use that as a bit of a litmus test to propel them forward towards May?
Well, it's always tricky when you have a state election and the incumbent is also of the same sort of party as the incumbent at the federal level, where at the federal level they're not doing perhaps as well as they would like. They're certainly making, at the federal level, all sorts of mistakes and how can we put this? Announcements which don't seem to be well thought out. Now, the New South Wales government has done a pretty good job of distancing itself from the federal government without being seen to be too openly anti the federal government. And it's sort of quite clear that the federal members are keeping clear of the state election. They're keeping a low profile.
We'll run our race and we'll run our race over here for now.
Well, in a sense, I mean, the federal government needs not to be seen to be too close to what's happening in New South Wales, because that will certainly remind people in New South Wales of the fiascos that have been happening over the past 12 months in Canberra. So the state government doesn't want to see that as part of their problem. And I think for the most part, the Berejiklian government has been pretty good at keeping those sorts of negativities from impacting too heavily. The Labor Party is running pretty hard on various climate change policies, and that's one of the issues that is of great concern to people across various electorates. And the expose, I suppose you could say, the disaster in the Murray-Darling Basin with the water issues, which has not been very well managed and to some extent is seen by some of the participants as being New South Wales not being as helpful as they, people further down the river would like. But whatever the rights and wrongs of that, it is the sort of thing that brings into play consideration about climate change and about what's being done about it. And unfortunately for the Liberal coalition, the national levels are sort of making claims which can't really be nailed down and supported by the relevant evidence. They're making quite misleading claims around emissions and where they're at and what sort of policies are going to be useful in addressing that. At the state level, there are a number of issues around that the state government needs to be seen to be proactive, and at the moment it's keeping a relatively low profile, and that's partly because of the sort of dichotomy, if you like, between the state coalition and the federal coalition. So the state government is in a sort of a difficult position. It has to respond to what it perceives voters are saying or are thinking about these sorts of issues, but it needs to do so in a way that doesn't cause too many problems for the party at the national level. And
Jim, just very quickly, where do we see minor parties this time around? I mean, we've got the likes of Mark Latham up front of One Nation in the state, in the Senate, some other players there maybe?
Well, given the disaffection with the major parties, the election for the upper house is likely to see a bit of a sort of upswing, if you like, in the minor parties. And in particular, we're likely to see Mark Latham return to a seat in Parliament, this time in the upper house. How long he'll stay with Pauline Hanson's One Nation party, that's a sort of $1 million question, because people join that party, get elected on that platform, and then they bail out pretty quickly and become something else. Whether Mark Latham will stay the distance with that party, that's an open question, but we were likely to see him return to Parliament. We probably see the shooters and fishers get a little more consolidated. The Greens are in a difficult position, whether they're able to improve on their position. I suspect not. I suspect that they're probably going to suffer a bit of a backlash, and possibly because Labor will perhaps steal a bit of a march on them by borrowing some of the Greens' policies, making them their own with a little bit of a makeover, and enabling voters to see Labor as the party, doing something about the environment. The final thing I'd say here, though, is that there seem to be lots of promises being made, and whether any of those promises have substance in terms of being actually implemented and carried out, I think that remains to be seen. I mean, they trotted out the issue of the Glendale interchange. How long has that been going now? 21 years?
98.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yet again, there's a promise. Will anyone deliver on it? That remains to be seen.
It's just at its 21st. Jim, no matter what happens, it won't be boring. We'll talk to you next week, and who knows, maybe Mark Latham will have something to say between now and then. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mark.
That is our Professor of Politics, Jim Jose, on 2NURFM.